Hello and welcome to Commodity Champions. I'm Manisha Gupta. The union budget is less than 2 weeks away. One of the key allocations to look forward to will be that of agriculture and allied sectors, which are the largest sources of livelihood for the country. And according to a recent report by Deloitte India, this sector has the potential to generate more than $800 billion in revenue for the country with an investment of over $270 billion by 2031. The report suggests that the government should introduce policies to support technology adoption for modernizing operations in the agriculture space. It also expects the government to incentivize agri-tech startups to improve accessibility for smallholder farmers. To discuss this further, we are now joined by Anand Ramanathan. He's partner at Deloitte India. Mr. Ramanathan, hi. You've authored the report and there is just so much of detailing that we've seen happen into this report. And unlike last year, 2023-24 is highly uncertain. The war is still on, the recession fears, maybe a soft landing is what the world is working with. But we still are looking at higher rate hikes. The data is still not better when you look at US or China or Japan for that matter. So, and climate change is just one part of this. And then you have weather, which is not very comforting as well, the latest details that have come in. How are we entering into this budget, looking at all the macros, the weather concerns, etc.?
Sure, Manisha. I think from an agri-business standpoint, we've never had it as good in terms of the kind of potential that exists in the sector and the demand that's not just in India, but also global. And hence, if you look at agriculture, all other sectors will take land away from agriculture. So agriculture has to perform by doing more with less. And hence, to that extent, productivity, yield, and looking at the entire ag-tech sector. I mean, if you look at the ag-tech center in India, it's one of the biggest and the fastest growing globally. And one of the reasons for that is the large base in the country itself and the needs of the country to look at increase in yield, productivity, greater levels of production for facing this demand-supply mismatch that we see globally. So to that extent, I think a lot can be done with the agribusiness sector, starting right from the inputs in the farm sector, moving to logistics, to processing, and finally with retail demand. Because one of the biggest challenges is for the farmer to find the right prices, and hence it's always important. There's a lot of focus traditionally on the supply side, but we also need to focus on looking at how to get the best price for the marketable surplus. So to that extent, technology can play a role in all of these different parts of the value chain.
I will come to technology, but I do want to start with the allocations. And last year, in the last budget, that is, we saw bigger allocations for PM Kisan or PM Fasal Bima Yojana or the interest subsidy on short-term loans, etc. While the expectation is that none of these allocations would be cut, you could actually see higher allocations continuing for agriculture. What is the sense that you make of expenditure vis-a-vis the revenue that we can see from here?
See, the challenge in agriculture is not so much the allocation. I think the political will and capital exists to allocate to agriculture. The challenge has always been implementation. And hence, are the allocated numbers actually getting utilized, right? So that's the big challenge. And one of the areas where we will see greater levels of awareness is all around crop insurance. So to that extent, there will be greater levels of adoption to protect the farmer from the vagaries of various seasonal and weather conditions. But beyond that, what is also important is to see how is it that we can transfer information to the farmer. And primarily, this is around using better quality seeds, using better hybrids, looking at sustainable inputs. Now, a lot of this requires communication and building awareness at the ground level, which is more than what the budget can do. It's also about taking the state governments together and working in tandem, where all resources are utilized to enhance productivity in this sector.
Oh, well, absolutely. Anand, I take your point. Announcing a scheme and then allocating funds is one part of it, and then implementation and ensuring that there is progress going forward is yet another. When you look back, what is the report card until now, let's say for the last couple of years, pre-COVID to now?
I think the COVID time was a good time for enhancing collaboration, right? So if you look at it, there's a lot of competition between the states to utilize funds that have been allocated to them from the center. And therefore, and agriculture is one of those areas where interventions were required because there was a lot of focus on providing food grain at a cheap or at very low prices to consumers. And hence, to that extent, we have seen a lot of focus around looking at the distribution system and making that effective, right? And therefore, the center and the state have worked in tandem. Beyond that, I also think the agriculture sector is very important from a livelihood standpoint. So in areas like animal husbandry and looking at better yields at the district block level, a lot of state governments have utilized budgets which are available to enhance productivity and grow volumes. So to that extent, I think the last 2 years were good. And if this continues, we'll see even more competition between states to utilize the funds that are available and also make do with the regulations that are already there, right? For example, if you look at the Model APMC Act, in terms of enforcement, not all states have done the same. But states which have done it well have actually gained, right? And therefore, what can existing regulation itself provide to enhance livelihoods and increase throughput and volume is something that will see a lot of focus from both the center and the states.
Anand, another thing that has been constantly being forced is about infrastructure, whether it's about APMCs, as you spoke about, but fisheries, meat, poultry, infrastructure is something that really is a weak link here. Part A of question is that. Part B is about technology that we talk about, whether it's the use of drones, which clearly we have seen a policy come through, or robots for that matter, AI, Internet of Things. There's a lot that is being put on plate, but is it being consumed?
Right. So on the first part, in terms of infrastructure, I think there's always been a focus around infrastructure. We used to talk about mega food parks and the like. But increasingly, what policymakers are becoming sensitive to is a micro level intervention, right? So can we have micro cold storages? Can we have micro entrepreneurship promoting micro distilleries, micro processing sites, etc., right? Because ultimately you want to be close to the farm gate to avoid things like wastage, transportation costs, etc. And hence, how can we look at providing infrastructure closer to the farm gate? And hence, financing becomes very important. And that's where the banks and the microfinance institutions, along with the FPOs, the farmer producer organizations, play an important role, right? So we will increasingly see a lot of focus around looking at promoting some of this micro entrepreneurship closer to the farm gate from an infrastructure standpoint. The second bit is also around water. Given sustainability, it's also important to look at infrastructure holistically for agriculture, and hence irrigation and reducing the dependence on the monsoon is the other big area, right? So apart from micro irrigation, can we look at large lift irrigation projects? If you look at Madhya Pradesh, for example, an excellent example of irrigation making available water, which has actually helped in greater levels of throughput and productivity, right? So these are going to be some of the focus areas from an infrastructure standpoint. Now, quickly moving to technology, I think that's the single biggest enabler for agribusiness. And technology can be important in all parts of the value chain. So on the input side, there is now technology which is precision agriculture technology, which helps you provide the right inputs at the right cost with the right levels of water for better productivity. And intensification is very important, right? You need to grow more from the limited resources that you have, right? And hence, to that extent, precision agriculture plays a big role there. The second bit is around looking, like you said, drones, for example. One of the big challenges we have is that we don't get enough information at the right time, right? So can we do crop surveys using drones itself? And on the back of that, provide better marketing for the produce volumes that are generated. So that's going to be an important area where for some crops, for example, if you take sugarcane, there is very precise information available on what the size and scale of the crop is going to be. But the same thing has not cascaded to areas like food grains and other large volume oil seeds, pulses, etc.
Okay.
And hence crop surveys through drones, very important. Then moving a little further, if we were to look at on the demand side, right, we spoke about farmers' realization being important. They need to realize better prices. So now you have a lot of startups which provide the inputs. They have physical infrastructure at the village level, and they collect the output, aggregate it, and make it available for large retailers and export houses, etc. Right. So I think there needs to be a lot of focus also on the demand side. We need to ensure that the produce that we have is also marketed well and the best price realization happens, right? So that's going to be another important area where technology can play a very useful and constructive role.
Well, absolutely. Anand, I'll wind down this conversation with, a fireside really. What do you think after so many budgets and such hard work and so many allocations being done, would you say is the highly neglected sector even now within the agriculture, within the farming as a sector, as an industry? And what is that one thing that you wish does go through this budget?
Right. So I think currently we need to look at traditional weaknesses in value addition, right? For example, I'll just give you an example. India is moving away, right, from its carbohydrates to a more protein-based diet, to more fresh produce, etc. And hence, looking at high value addition processing is very important. Okay. Now, just one statistic. We have about 200 odd pack houses in the country. These are places where fruits are, for example, sorted, graded, etc. Now, 160 of them exist in Maharashtra, right? And just 40 in the remaining part of the country. And this is a big enabler for exports. So can we look at a better quality of small scale infrastructure, right? These pack houses are not large mega warehouses. They are small infrastructure which needs to be made available for the ecosystem to grade, sort better, and therefore on the back of that, then brand it and send it to exports, etc. Right? So I think the export side of things, where you need certification, where you need better infrastructure for processing, is one big area which has been neglected. And I think there's great potential, right? Because if that export value chain grows, and if it improves, then everything, I mean, all the infrastructure around agribusiness improves, right? Okay. And even it has a cascading impact on the domestic business. Absolutely. So I really think that we need to look at, and you spoke of fisheries, there are so many sectors like that where India has so much to give to the world, but we are just not aware of the potential, and we don't have the little infrastructure that we need at the ground level to make it happen.
All right. So it's all about implementation and modernization that the budget perhaps could be looking well into. Anand, as always, thank you so much for joining us and laying it all out in detail for our viewers here. With that, we're heading into a short break. But coming up, we discuss with Sandeep Sabharwal, CEO of SLSM, on budget wish list for agri value chains, taxations, warehousing, all of that in a break. Welcome back. Before we went into a break, we were discussing the budget expectations for the agriculture sector. Sohanlal Commodity Management, which offers warehousing services for agriculture commodities, is seeking certain tax exemptions for players like itself who add value to the agriculture supply chain. Joining me now to discuss their expectations is the group CEO, Sandeep Sabharwal. Sandeep, hi, good to have you. And there's just so much that the agriculture wants, hopes for, and is including in its wish list as well. But I'll start with the warehousing industry itself. And what is it that you would want from the finance minister this time?
So, good afternoon, Manisha. I think one of our wish lists, which has been neglected for the past 4 years, is the rationalization of GST. I don't know whether it becomes a part of the budget or not. But on a larger purview, what we are saying is that when players like us provide warehousing services, which is a pillar to food security, and when we are providing these services out of leased warehouses, the lease that we take on ground are treated as commercial leases, which mean that they are subjected to 18% GST. Whereas when we give out our services on top of those warehouses, our agri-product services are GST devoid. So what it means is that 18% of that cost gets levied onto my customer. Now, on a financial number, please understand this 18% actually translates into 13% inflation. How? Because 70% of the warehousing cost goes towards lease rentals itself. So I think one of our biggest wish list has been the rationalization of warehouses, where warehouses are being used for agri-produce storage and agri-produce throughput. These GST should actually be exempted from it. And that's one important way on the warehousing part. But having said so, I think there are a lot of other wish lists that we have on the whole agri sector. And I think I would want to add to this is that, it's high time that the government understands that agri is the unsung hero. Whether it was COVID or post-COVID, agri has been showing a consistent 3 to 3.5% growth on a very large base in India. I know India is very well placed in the macro food environment, despite the Ukraine-Russia war, despite the inflation across the world. If you look at advanced estimates, our agri crops are doing very well. Having said so, it is very, very important that the government looks at inclusiveness towards private sector and agri. In the previous half hour of your show, you were talking about allocations and larger allocations being made. The question is not only about allocations, the question is the inclusiveness of those allocations to private sector. And I think that's where our second demand comes in, is that if you look at agri storage and agri financing, they go hand in hand. There is no financing without storage, and there is no storage without financing, especially in a country like India, which is a 2-crop cycle country. So having said so, it is very, very important that the agri credit inclusiveness specifically to NBFCs like us, which are providing last mile credibility and last mile credit to farmers and FPOs, etc. Why are we being excluded? When government is allocating large funds to NABARD, and NABARD is then given those funds at 6% and NABARD actually uses those funds to leverage its balance sheet and then does forward lending. Why is that same not given to private sector players itself, which have proven themselves, which have substantial balance sheets on agri side, and yet they are being devoid of these funds? Which is, I think, a very fair demand from our end, because at the end of the day, we are regulated by RBI, we are regulated by all government entities ourselves. So it's very important that this inclusiveness is brought, and we are brought at par with institutions like that.
Oh, absolutely. So that's about warehousing and agriculture credit, and that's a wish list coming in on both of those sides from Sandeep here. But Sandeep, the other area clearly is about value addition when it comes to many of these commodities. And the second part also is about the export of many of these agri-produce. What is it that you think the finance minister would look at when you look at these areas?
So if you talk about value addition, Manisha, it's very important for us to understand the entire agri value chain. Now, frankly speaking, if I look at value addition in pulses or in meat products, a lot of these value additions actually should culminate into higher prices for the intermediary who's doing that value addition, which means that for him, the ROE and for him to run his sector in value addition, whether it is packed houses, whether it is flour millers, whether it is pulses millers, that should happen. And that can only happen if, export of the products and the inclusiveness of the food basket of the world is set with the Indian context. Now, this is where it becomes a problem. Now, India, if I look at the protein deficiency of India, over the past 15 years, we have always been a protein deficient country from a vegetarian perspective. And yet we have always been dependent upon imports of pulses, whether it is from Africa, whether it is from Myanmar, whether it is from Australia. Now, on the other hand, when we see that there is, like, for example, last year, if you see, where the wheat prices have gone skyrocketed across the world, it was an immense shining opportunity for India to actually step out and start exporting value-added products. But then at the last moment, we see a lot of restrictions coming in. And those restrictions, albeit I'm not here to discuss whether the restrictions are right or wrong. I'm only here to discuss that whether the timing of those restrictions should be more strategically thought about. It should be more planned. We have enough evidence on board now, wherein we are aware how prices definitely move. We are aware on the production capability of India. We are also aware on the buffer stocks. India has sufficient buffer stocks on wheat. In fact, the new advanced estimates will be above our buffer stocks in April.
Right.
So what does that mean? Does it mean that we should do a blanket export ban, or is it an idea that we should allow exports to happen on certain value-added products, but with a margin line or with a budget baseline which says that below this you are not allowed to export? So instead of actually blanketly saying that no exports, blanketly saying no, you will not be allowed to market your produce, I think it's a high time the Indian government starts deciding this, that let's put some buffer timelines, buffer pricing into place, and let larger exports go across, because that's how value addition is going to happen. That is how ROE is going to become bigger in the sector.
Clearly.
And that is where, if you look at why I said that India agriculture has been a shining star, is that this is one agriculture sector which is employing 60% of the population of India, yet only contributing 19.9% to our GDP. So it is very, very important that we set expectations correct. We also set our targets correctly.
All right. Oh, well, absolutely. And we are hoping that this budget perhaps sorts all of that, because this is also seen as a budget which is a full budget ahead of elections next year. The next budget perhaps could be a more limited one. But my final question to you, Sandeep, is about modernization. And that is something that almost everybody seems to be talking about, on whether it's about awareness. I mean, we do understand that the information now is part and parcel. All farmers do get that. And there's a lot that is done by the way of digitization, whether it's opening of accounts or passing out information. But the whole Internet of Things and the drone part, and I was talking to Anand about that as well. How much of that is available for the farmer? Where is the funding coming in from? And how soon that can be a reality?
So it's already a reality. People like us have been using this for the past 7 years. It's nothing new. Only thing is that it's become the buzzword now because of the funding that we saw from private equity players coming in the last 2 to 3 years in this sector. Now, putting this into a context, I would like to bring on the table is the fact that, is this sector or is the technology aligned with the sectoral evidences on the ground? The answer is somewhat yes and no. You see, India, we'd love to do drones, we'd love to have more inclusiveness on the ground, but at the same time, the scale of inclusiveness is not there. The farmers are not readily, willingly including themselves from and actually diving into the entire agri ecosystem and saying, I am going to use this IoT or I am going to use this entire technology for my benefit. Most of what we are seeing right now is an adaptation in terms of more information processing, not on commercial basis.
Okay.
And that is one of the reasons which brings the question of scalability to such projects. Why I say that is that despite the fact that India used to have 7,557 APMC market yards, 1,000 are still functional. Now, having put that into perspective, what is more important is that all these IoTs and all these startups and all people, including us, put together, we're still not contributing of more than 5% of the agri input-output services in this country. So automatically, technology itself is not, just the answer. I think the implementation of technology on the ground, along with the reality of Indian agriculture sector, is what should be the way forward.
Oh, yes. So, well, lots of opportunities there, and there are some concerns and a big wish list as well coming in from the agriculture sector, and hoping that the finance minister does listen to that at this point in time. Thank you so much, Sandeep, for joining us with all of that wish list. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Markets, Commodity Champions. Thank you for watching.